Hello everyone. Recently, as I was going over my Goodreads, I noticed that I have quite the few number of science fiction and fantasy series that I have started reading and have not completed. And I recently put out a video of 10 series that I would like to begin in the not too distant future. And I thought, as a companion video to that, I would go over what these ongoing series are that I've got on my reading docket so far. And kind of what their status is, whether they're on the top of my list of books that I want to read soon, whether they're on the list but maybe not at the top of my list, whether they're kind of a maybe, or whether they're books that have been removed off the list, series that I'm not going to complete, that I'm not going to finish. So there's about 20 series here that we're going to go over today, and so let's get started. The first series that I'd like to talk about that I've started but have not yet completed is going to be The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. This is obviously one of the most famous books series in modern fantasy, and I have read the first two books. I've read Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, and this is going to be a maybe. Somewhat surprisingly, I have read actually almost every book that Brandon Sanderson has written at this point. Not every book, but almost every book. And the Stormlight Archive is where I just burned out during that read-through. I felt like the payoffs weren't quite what I was looking for, or weren't quite satisfying enough to justify just how long those books were and how much of a time commitment it was. So I've got the first two under my belt. I plan on finishing them, but probably not in time for Wind and Truth, so this is not a DNF. I'm not removing this from the list, but it is a maybe. Next on the list is going to be the Sun Eater series by Christopher Ruocchio. As of recording this video, I have completed 5 books in the series. This is top of the list. Top of my next to read. I want to complete Disquiet Gods as soon as possible. I'm reading that as of recording this, and then as soon as Shadows Upon Time is released in 2025, I'm going to be picking that up. So this is top of the list. Next is going to be The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. I've read 6 books in this series. This is on my reading list, but not necessarily near the top. I kind of pick these up whenever I get the itching for them. I've enjoyed each entry in the series so far, but I never find this being something that I'm just craving, absolutely loving, from beginning to end for any of the entries. They're mixed to positive on it. Next on the series is going to be The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. So I've read 6 books in this series. The last book I read was Lord of Chaos, I believe, and this is going to be off the list completely. I don't plan on finishing this series. This was one of the early fantasy series that I started, and as I would read it and then read other books and then come back to it, I found more and more that the things that I liked early on in the series were being less and less emphasized, and the things I didn't like were coming more to the forefront. So I don't plan on finishing The Wheel of Time. I know it's beloved to many people, and if I'd read this when I was a teenager, maybe I'd feel differently about it. But for right now, The Wheel of Time, nope, don't plan on finishing it, so it's off the list. Next up is going to be the Dune series by Frank Herbert. So I've currently read the first 4 books in this series, last of them being God Emperor of Dune, and this is going to be on the top of my list. I know that the last 2 books, Heretics and Chapter House Dune, are somewhat controversial, but I would like to read them, if for nothing else than just to say that I finished the Frank Herbert Dune book. So this is going to be on the top of my list in terms of priorities of a series that I would like to complete in the next year. Next is going to be the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. I read the 2 short story collections, didn't really like them, so this is off the list entirely. Don't really plan on finishing the Witcher books. Next is going to be the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn. I read the first book in this series, was actually somewhat disappointed in it. It wasn't quite what I was expecting. Not bad, but just wasn't what I was expecting. So I hope to come back to the Thrawn trilogy and read more of the Star Wars novels soon. So it is on the list, but it is not high up on the list. Next is going to be the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie. This is definitely on the list. I've read the first 4 novels. The last one I read was Best Served Cold. And this might be high up on my reading list. I've been getting the itching for Joe Abercrombie since it's been about a year since I read Best Served Cold. I've been really getting a hankering for his stuff. The reason why I put this series down is Best Served Cold was not what I was expecting. I was expecting it to be a much more Monza-focused book, and Shivers is actually much more of a main character in the book, so my expectations needed to be adjusted. This was not a bad book by any means, but that original trilogy by Joe Abercrombie was fantastic, and so I definitely have hope that the Heroes, Red Country, and the Age of Madness trilogy will be something that I'll really enjoy. So it's definitely on the list, and maybe not the top, but it's getting close. Next is going to be the Reckoners trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. This is his young adult superhero trilogy. I read the first book in this and enjoyed it, but this is going to be my first maybe on the list. I don't really know if I'm going to finish this or not at this point. I'd feel bad if I finished the Reckoners trilogy, but not the Stormlight Archive, so it's a maybe. It was enjoyable, but many of Sanderson's, for me, most annoying writing techniques really come to the forefront of the Reckoners trilogy. People have pointed out that one of his weird quirks is writing characters who are bad at making analogies. It's a very weird writing quirk, but he has like probably 4 or 5 characters in across his series that do this, and this is front and center in the Reckoners trilogy. So some of his things that are more young adult, that lean more into those tropes, are at the forefront here. I enjoyed the first, I think it's Steelheart is the first book in the Reckoners series, so not bad, but it is maybe. It's not a priority by any means. Next up is going to be The Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. This is definitely on the list, and it is at the top of the list. Alan from the Library of Alexandria is obviously the Long Price prophet here on BookTube. He really hypes up the series. I read the first book, Shadow and Summer, and I enjoyed it, but was disappointed, and it's because I read it at the wrong time in my life. And that was much earlier this year, at the beginning of the year. So I'm hoping if I come back to it with some adjusted expectations and go from the first book and just keep going with the series, that I'll enjoy it much more. So this is high on the priority list going forward, end of this year into next year. Next up is going to be The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. I read the first 3 books of this, and this is off the list. I enjoyed these books when I read them. I got a good chuckle out of them, but that's about it. I remember barely anything about the plots. I would much rather go back and reread the first Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book than actually read the last 2 in the series. It just, at a certain point, the gimmick started to lose interest with me, so this is going to be off the list here. Next is going to be the Broken Empire trilogy by Mark Lawrence. This is on the list. I read the first 2 books in this, so King of Thorns. I enjoyed these first 2 books. I found the project that Mark Lawrence was trying to do. I found it very interesting. I found it compelling, and especially as I've read more Gene Wolfe, I think that will help recontextualize my reading of Mark Lawrence, especially this trilogy, because there's some very unique similarities between the 2 series. So I'm excited to see if my perspective on it has changed at all. These are difficult books to read in some ways, so these are not high on my priority list, but I would like to finish the trilogy. I might go back and reread the first 2 books, though, before I finish the trilogy. I like them, but I think there's more that I can get out of them, so they're definitely on the list, if not high. Next up is going to be His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. I read the first book in this, The Golden Compass, and it was a perfectly fine book, you know. Philip Pullman says he wrote this kind of to be the anti-Narnia, and you can kind of see that in how he wrote. I felt like it was very competently written. There's good atmosphere to his story, but it just didn't grip me. Once again, maybe if I had grown up reading this, I would just really be in love with this series, but I didn't love it, liked it, but didn't love it, and just have not really much of a motivation to keep reading in it, so it is off the list for the time being. Next up is going to be the Edan trilogy by Philip Chase. So this is obviously very popular in this corner of BookTube. It's a self-published fantasy trilogy by our own Dear Dr. Fantasy. This is not only on the list, this is near the top of the list. As soon as the next audiobook comes out, that would be for Prophet of Edan, Book 2, I'm going to be listening to that the day it comes out. I absolutely adored the audiobook for Book 1, The Way of Edan, and so as soon as Prophet of Edan's audiobook comes out, I will be listening to it. It is on the list and near the top. Next will be The Solar Cycle by Gene Wolfe. This is also going to be a top priority in the next year. The Book of the Long Sun, which is the next sub-series of The Solar Cycle, is something I'm really excited to get to. If you've been on my channel at all, you'll see lots of Gene Wolfe content, so you already know about my love for him. And so, yeah, The Solar Cycle is definitely one of the series that I'm excited to get to. Next will be The Axe of Cain by Matthew Woodring Stover. This is a very bizarre series in many ways. It combines sword and sorcery fantasy with like a dystopian, cyberpunk type aesthetic. So the two of them mixed with like a portal fantasy dividing the two worlds makes for a very compelling read. Matthew Stover as an author, I really, really like. His writing style is gripping, very hard-hitting, very noir in a lot of ways. And so I really enjoyed the first book in this series, Heroes Die. Now, I know that the later books are pretty divisive among fans. Some say Blade of Tyshel is absolutely amazing, and some say it's 1 star, one of the worst books they've ever read. So this is on the list, but I'm not sure if or when I'll be completing it, but I'm definitely interested to see where I fall with Blade of Tyshel. So The Axe of Cain is on the list, but I only read the first book, and as to when I complete it, it's a little bit unclear. The next series will be the Red Rising Saga by Pierce Brown. So I went through this trilogy a couple years ago, and I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. And I think I'll like it a lot more on a reread. Pierce Brown's writing style is first-person, present tense, and I found that to be very difficult for me personally to jive with. I really have a hard time with especially that present tense way of telling the story, and I felt like Morningstar was a perfectly fine conclusion, so didn't feel a drive to go continue on with the series, but I know he's wrapping up the second sub-series here pretty soon, so I don't know. This is on the list, but still kind of a maybe, so if I do get to it, it'll be a while, but I'm still interested in seeing where he's going to take the story from that ending in Morningstar. The next series is going to be The Dark Tower by Stephen King. This is going to be a high priority on the list, so I read the first 5 books of The Dark Tower, and I really like a lot of the things Stephen King does here. It's very odd, there's a lot of weird ideas, which is absolutely what I'm here for in the series, but some of King's worser tendencies, he's very long-winded in certain parts of the series. He's got weird sex stuff that shows up throughout the series that I really don't love. So that's kind of dampered my excitement for it, but it's been a long time since I read Wolves of the Kala. That was the last one that I read, and I do want to go through Song of Susanna and The Dark Tower, since I know those two are really where fans get split on the series. So this is definitely coming up on the docket and is probably a high priority going forward, but it has been a while since I read the Wolves of the Kala. Next up is going to be the Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft. So I'm currently finishing up Senwin Ascends, the first book, and really enjoying it. So this is definitely going to be staying on my to-read list. Having said that, I don't know that it's a high priority. I would like to read more of them, but we'll just see. We've already got quite a few high priorities here. Some are going to have to take the lead over others, so I don't know that Books of Babel is going to be pushing itself up the list anytime soon, but I've been reading through the series sort of with my wife, and so that's been enjoyable. And I'm liking the series, don't have anything against it particularly, but just not high on the list at this point. Another maybe on the list is going to be the Earthsea books by Ursula K. Le Guin. So I've only read the first book, A Wizard of Earthsea, and I enjoyed it just fine. I described it kind of like the Chronicles of Narnia, but with Carl Jung instead of the Bible being the analogy. And yeah, it was fine. I've really nothing to say against it other than to say, as with some of these other ones, maybe if I've read it when I was younger, I would be more engaged, but I know plenty of adults like the Earthsea books. I just don't feel a particular drive to them. I think I'll need to wait till I'm really craving something short and thought-provoking to get back into these, but I know Le Guin is obviously a very beloved author in the fantasy space, so I want to read the Earthsea books, but probably not anytime soon that I finish the series, so it's going to be a maybe on this list. Getting towards the end here, we have the Night Angel series by Brent Weeks. So I read the first trilogy, and so what we have left for the series is going to be Night Angel Nemesis, the most recent addition to this series. So I'm excited to read Night Angel Nemesis. I know that Brent Weeks really said he challenged himself as an author. He tried some new things, so I'm excited to see where the series goes. The last book in the Night Angel series, I didn't love everything that he did in that last book. I felt like it was definitely the weakest of the trilogy, but I think there's a lot of room to grow with the story. I'm excited to see where things go with Kylar and many of the other characters. So this is on the list, but it's not really a high priority, mainly because there's other things on the list that take precedence. So it's on, but not a high priority. Next is going to be the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer. I read the first book in this series, that would be Annihilation, and I enjoyed it just fine, but as I've said with some of these other ones, not much of a drive to keep going. It felt like Annihilation was a pretty self-contained story, so we're going to keep it at that. It's off the list for now. And then the final series that we're going to talk about today is the Ranger's Apprentice series by John Flanagan. I read the first 2 books in this series. They're fine. These are the most young adult. Actually, these aren't even young adult. These are middle grade books, middle grade, very low fantasy books, almost like historical fantasy because they're medieval set but without much fantastical elements to it. These are books that I would give my kids to read, and I thought they were good, but once again, not exactly what I'm looking for at this stage in my reading journey, so they are off the list for the time being. So out of almost 25 books on this list here, the top priorities are going to be the Sun Eater series. I really want to get that finished up. I want to read Long Price Quartet very, very soon, so that's going to be high up on the list. I'd like to finish up The Dark Tower, The Way of Edan, read more of the First Law books, read the Dune books when I can fit them in, and then the Solar Cycle, so Book of the Long Sun, which is next up for that Gene Wolfe series. So yeah, it's probably a stacked list, but there's quite a lot of books here. So that's a brief overview as far as my status goes with these books. Wow, that is quite a lot. So I don't know when I'm going to be finishing these up. But those are the priorities anyway. And some of the ones that I said aren't going to be, that are off the list now, hey, convince me to put them back on. Never say never, right? But that's kind of where I sit with these almost 25 book series that I've been reading over the last few years. So let me know what you think of all of this, guys. If there's opinions I have here that are absolutely wrong, feel free to let me know. And if there are series that are on here that I haven't started that you think I should, once again, as I always say, I'm open to suggestions. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.